With Geno Smith heading to Vegas, the Seahawks already have been linked to a favorite to replace him in Sam Darnold. Is Darnold the best fit to take over in Clint Kubiak's offense in 2025? We're going to be taking a deep dive here on our latest edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in for this special Sunday pre-free agency episode. We greatly appreciate it, whether you're tuning in from Port Angeles, Washington, or Richmond, Virginia. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. It's been a stunning past 4 or 5 days for the Seattle Seahawks. You had DK Metcalf requesting a trade, Tyler Lockett cut, and then Geno Smith sent packing to the Las Vegas Raiders for just a third-round pick. We're going to be taking a look at a bunch of replacement options for Geno Smith, more in-depth today than the breaking news on Friday, including Sam Darnold's fit in Clint Kubiak's offense. And we're going to be discussing what we expect based on what we're hearing on free agency for the Seahawks with the legal tampering period opening tomorrow across the NFL. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Stunning most of the NFL world on Friday, the Seahawks shipped Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders, reuniting him with Pete Carroll in exchange for a late third-round draft selection. It gives the Seahawks 9 picks in the upcoming 2025 draft, and it puts Geno Smith back with the coach that gave him the second chance to be a starting quarterback in Seattle. Look, Rob, we can discuss why this move was made, all the little wrinkles that appear to be behind this move happening. Now a lot of discussion that Geno Smith may have wanted to just be out of Seattle in general. There's a lot of things to unpack on that front. But look, free agency starts tomorrow, really, with the legal tampering period opening. It's time to focus on who's going to be replacing him, and that's certainly what the Seahawks are quickly doing. And the one name that immediately cropped up once the news broke that Smith was getting traded, no surprise here, Sam Darnold, widely considered the number one free agent quarterback in this year's class after a breakout year in Minnesota. This has one of those buyers beware type things to it because Sam Darnold, his first 6 years, was a below average starting quarterback and lost his job with not one but 2 different teams. And at the same time, he's only 27 years old, and he threw 35 touchdown passes last year for a 14-win Vikings team. And oh, by the way, Clint Kubiak runs a pretty similar offense to the one that Kevin O'Connell runs in Minnesota.
Well, not only that, I mean, it's an offense that Sam Darnold has a great deal of familiarity with because, of course, both of them were with the San Francisco 49ers 2 years ago. You know, Clint Kubiak with the New Orleans Saints this past season. And as you just pointed out, Sam Darnold, of course, was an MVP candidate for much of the past season with the Minnesota Vikings, including a spectacular performance in Seattle at Lumen Field where he was spectacular, threw the game winner with pressure in his face. And so that's the thing, is that should Seattle be pivoting from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold, then I think this is an upgrade. And I said as much, a month ago, we were having conversations about the idea of Seattle, looking to extend Geno Smith and who might be some free agent or veterans via trade options for the Seahawks. And Sam Darnold was the first name out of my mouth. And look, I understand that the last 2 games, regular season finale, and then the playoffs, Sam Darnold did not play well. The Minnesota Vikings did not play well. And so there's obviously a lot of teams out there and fans out there that are concerned about how he performed in those last 2 games. Look, I think that Sam Darnold, I should say this. I was a massive fan of Sam Darnold coming out of USC, both in terms of the physical talent, just the leadership, ability that he possesses. I've been scouting for an awful long time, Corbin, and talked to an awful lot of people at USC over the years, and they rave about Sam Darnold as a human being. And I think that is important, especially at the quarterback position. And I don't mean to say anything negative about Geno Smith. I think that he is a quality quarterback in the NFL. I am excited about his possibilities with the Las Vegas Raiders. However, I do think that the amount of money that he was expecting based on his numbers at Seattle, at his advancing age, I just didn't think was tenable if you were looking to compete for a Super Bowl rather than just be in that kind of playoff conversation. So whether it be Sam Darnold, whether it be one of the other veteran quarterbacks that we're going to be discussing here today, or one of a number of quarterbacks that I think are suddenly more in play for the Seahawks via the draft, I think that this is a move that helps the Seahawks actually get back to the Super Bowl. And that, of course, is what it's all about.
Yeah, look, we've had this discussion ad nauseum because we were talking about better replacement options. And I've gone back now. I've had an opportunity here since Friday to go back and watch a little bit of Sam Darnold. I got a long way to go. It takes a long time to watch all 22 film on all the games. But when you look at the playoff performance against the Rams, that game was mostly about Minnesota's offensive line, which you can make the caveat here. Well, Seattle's offensive line played like that all of last year. So how is Sam Darnold going to handle playing behind that line? But listen, his stats under pressure, at least if you're basing it off of the advanced stats from Pro Football Focus, his stats are very similar to Geno Smith in terms of completion percentage, and he threw far less interceptions and had more touchdowns. He had 13 touchdowns when he was under pressure last year. He was one of the league leaders in that. So you can look at those last two games, and I'm guilty of this, and I think that you can't throw those games out. They still have value. But I think you have to look at the entire season. And I went back and watched the Seahawks-Vikings game again in Seattle. And you may remember this, Rob, that it was raining. It was drizzling that game, which is typical for a Seattle game pretty much after September 15th. That's typical that you're going to get rain at home games outdoors. And he made a couple of just flat-out ridiculous throws in that game in the rain. The touchdown that ended up being the game winner to Justin Jefferson, where he rolled out and somehow got away from multiple pass rushers. That was an example of him getting away from the pressure the way that Geno Smith has been able to do the last couple of years. So my viewpoint on this is this. If you're looking at the same contract, if Sam Darnold's wanting $40-45 million per year, and that's what Geno was looking for, I don't know that this is something that's going to move the needle for the Seattle Seahawks. However, if you are able to get him for $30 to $35 million, which there's been some reports out there suggesting that the market might not be quite as hot, and that might have played into Seattle's decision here once that was starting to surface in terms of his value. But if they can get him at $10 million less per year, what can you do with that $10 million, Rob? Well, if John Schneider is actually going to do it, go get offensive line help. And maybe in the end, you're able to build a more well-rounded team around a younger quarterback. And so I'm warming up to the idea that maybe that could work and still draft a quarterback as well, because I still have some reservations, because Minnesota really had a perfect situation there for Sam Darnold last year. Kevin O'Connell was dialed in all year long with his offense, with his scheme, really took a lot off the plate of Sam Darnold. He was able to make a lot of big plays. The offensive line till late in the year was one of the best in the NFL. I just wonder, throwing him into Seattle's current situation, especially if DK Metcalf's not on the roster, if you're looking at a future without DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and you're trying to rebuild your wide receiving room too, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered on that front. So could this work out and be better for the Seahawks? There's definitely a path where it could, and maybe it takes you to that next step where you're back competing. But a lot of it's going to boil down to the money and how that extra money that's saved, if they do save money, how John Schneider actually reallocates it to try to really attack the biggest weakness on this roster, which is that offensive line.
It is the offensive line, and I'm going to kind of table that conversation for a different day, just because, of course, we're going to have lots of time to kind of focus in on that. But I am going to focus in on the idea of DK Metcalf just for a moment. There is no question that, while I will kind of push back a little bit on the idea that Minnesota Vikings offensive line was terrific. I think that it's very average. I think it looked better because I just don't see a lot of difference-making defensive lines in the NFC North. That said, I do think that certainly the Minnesota Vikings, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, the tight end play, the running back play, they are very good at the skill positions. And so, sure, if the Seahawks do not have DK Metcalf out there on the field, because obviously Tyler Lockett is not going to be there, as we talked about before, and Jackson Smith and Jigba is an ascending star. But at the same time, there is no question that Minnesota is an upgrade in terms of skill position talent, in terms of pass catchers, than the Seahawks are if DK Metcalf is not there. So sure, regardless of who the quarterback is in Seattle, then they are going to have their work very much cut out for them, considering how much Seattle's offensive line struggled. And again, the lack of any kind of difference makers, any kind of straight line speed to be able to force defensive backs to play on their heels a little bit. That said, I would argue that Seattle does have a significant talent upgrade at running back compared to what Sam Darnold has ever experienced in the NFL. Not only in Minnesota, but in this previous stops, Carolina, San Francisco. Obviously, a healthy Christian McCaffrey is a different player, and then previously with the New York Jets as well. So again, I do think that whoever the quarterback is that's going to come in for the Seahawks in 2025, as long as Seattle's running back room is healthy, DK Metcalf or a commiserate type of a player on the outside is available to them, I am confident that Seattle's offensive line play is going to improve this upcoming season, whether it be free agency, whether it be the draft, or whether it just be the maturation of 7 offensive linemen selected by the Seahawks in the last 3 years. That is second only to that leads the NFC in terms of the draft picks allocated on the offensive line. I think that you are going to see some improvement in that way. And so I do think that the quarterback that comes into Seattle is in a position to succeed. And most of that is just because I have such great confidence in Clint Kubiak as the play caller. Somebody who, of course, has experience. And again, I would reiterate that I love his fit with Sam Darnold, the personality and the player.
When we come back, Sam Darnold's been the front runner already thrown out there. But listen, he's a free agent. Other teams have a chance to make a run at him as well. We're going to look at some other veteran options that the Seahawks could pivot to quickly if Sam Darnold falls through and they aren't able to get a deal for him to replace Geno Smith. We'll look at some of those other options coming up next year on our Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today, an expert who gives you your taxes and their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available at TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to the Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As we just discussed, Sam Darnold, the Vikings quarterback that is slated to hit free agency. The Vikings are not expected to bring him back with J.J. McCarthy coming back healthy. There's even been some murmurs. I don't know where these are coming from, but murmurs that maybe Aaron Rodgers wants to pull a Brett Favre and go back to Minnesota. So who knows what's going to end up happening. We've seen some pretty crazy stuff already happen here the last couple weeks in the NFL, which is year-round reality TV. If Sam Darnold is not going to be the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks next season, though, look, the Seahawks have to have a contingency plan here. When you're talking about free agency, you can't just say, well, Sam Darnold is going to be our guy. They might be really confident that they're going to be able to sign him, but other teams have a shot at signing him, and there are plenty of other teams that need quarterbacks. So there has to be a contingency plan in place, Rob. And while there's not necessarily any great free agent quarterbacks away from Sam Darnold, you've got some bigger names. You got some players that were former first-round picks that have some athleticism. And, of course, there's a familiar face that started 10 years in Seattle that might potentially be available as well. There's all kinds of names out there that could be second options if Sam Darnold ends up falling through and the Seahawks aren't able to sign it.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I suppose Russell Wilson, hey Seattle, could be a possibility for some. Aaron Rodgers could be a possibility for some. To me, there are two other options besides Sam Darnold that I'm going to focus in on here, just because of their youth and their fit in what I believe Clint Kubiak is going to be looking for, kind of the traditional West Coast offense. But I'm gonna say that because I really think that Daniel Jones can be successful in that scheme, but he also has the athletic ability. I think could be a running threat that I think that Mike McDonald, of course, his time in the Baltimore Ravens with Lamar Jackson is going to be very excited about that possibility. That was one of the things that I was, pretty critical of Geno Smith, and that a lot of other people as well, is that just felt like there were times that Geno Smith should have left the pocket and forced defenses to account for a running quarterback. So if we're going to kind of start to go down that road with a Daniel Jones, then I think you have to continue down that road with a quarterback like Justin Fields. To me, those are the two other quarterbacks out there that I think that you have to be kind of focusing on. Look, I think that it's Sam Darnold. I want to make sure that people realize that, again, I am 100% all in with that idea of Sam Darnold. However, I do think that Daniel Jones and Justin Fields have some upside to them. If Seattle was to go that route, I think they'd be getting them on the cheap. I think you're talking about a $10 to $15 million contract rather than a $30+ million contract that Sam Darnold will command. And if that is the way that the Seahawks go, then I think that you double down in the draft with a significant selection here. Somebody in the first 3 rounds. Of course, the Seahawks now have the 2 third-round picks because of that trade of Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders. That, to me, is the wheelhouse of this draft class. I don't think that this quarterback class in the draft has the top-end talent. I think a Shedeur Sanders, it's absolutely believable that he could fall all the way down to number 18 overall. I think that he would be a great fit in Clint Kubiak's offense because of his awareness, his anticipation, and the accuracy that he demonstrated this past season in leading all of college football with accuracy. So again, I think that there are the candidates in the draft. I think that there's some day 2 candidates out there that might make some sense as well. However, again, I think that Sam Darnold is the guy. And so I do think that Seattle does have a contingency plan in place. It would have been crazy talk if the Seahawks would have traded, if the Seahawks traded Geno Smith without already having a plan in place to replace him.
Yeah, you and I are split on this one. Daniel Jones, I've seen enough of. Look, Daniel Jones has started a lot of games in the NFL. Not the same with Justin Fields in the sense that, yeah, he started quite a few games, but Daniel Jones has got more starts under his belt. And look, both these guys can run the football. That's obvious. Justin Fields, to me, is another level, though. When we're talking about the dual threat capabilities, the passing, both these guys have been very hit and miss. There have been flashes where they have shown the ability to be able to throw the football, but there hasn't been the consistency. And you can make an argument, Justin Fields, at least early in his time in Chicago, did not have very many weapons to throw the football to, had a really bad offensive line. Daniel Jones, really, for most of his time in New York, I don't think he had a number 2 receiver, let alone a number 1.
Good point.
And so you can make arguments there. If DK Metcalf is back in Seattle and you've got Jack Smith and Jigba, these are going to easily be the best weapons that either one of these quarterbacks have had. And so, look, it could make some sense from a bridge quarterback standpoint to look at either one of those guys, and maybe one of them pops in Clint Kubiak's scheme that's got a lot of bootlegs, a lot of rollouts. A mobile quarterback can really make that work. Maybe one of these guys has a Geno Smith type resurrection in Seattle and ends up looking like a long-term starter. And they're both in their mid to late 20s too. So we're talking about younger quarterbacks in the Sam Darnold age range. If you're wanting to look at a wild card here, though, and this would be the other side of the spectrum, we're talking about a quarterback who is near the end of his career, but he has played for Clint Kubiak and played at a very high level for Clint Kubiak. Kirk Cousins, this has been one that has been it's been a toss-up for me. And the reason that I'm going to say it's been a toss-up, this is all assuming that Atlanta cuts him. If he's cut and Atlanta has to eat all that money on his huge contract, Seattle could sign him at veteran minimum, and all the rest is going to be paid to him for the Atlanta Falcons. Think of all the other pieces that you can add now because of what you're paying at quarterback. The caveat is he looked less mobile than the Statue of Liberty last year for the Atlanta Falcons, coming off of that Achilles injury. And there have been plenty of people that needed 2 years to be able to fully recover from that injury. Maybe he's more spry this upcoming season because he's had more time in an off season where he wasn't rehabbing. That could very well be the case. And we know he can get the ball out, very accurate, timing-based offense. He understands the ins and outs of Clint Kubiak's system. I don't think Seattle would trade for that contract. They're not going to move draft picks for it, but if he ends up a free agent, Clint Kubiak may be the voice saying, look, I can win a lot of games with Kirk Cousins as my quarterback, and I think I can get him back to playing at the level that he is capable of playing, especially an extra year removed from that injury. So that is one that I think is the dark horse here, because he's got to be a free agent. I don't see Seattle trying to trade for him, but that is a name that does have that familiarity checked off big time, has played more snaps than anybody for Clint Kubiak that's in the NFL.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I do think that Kirk Cousins, to me, is essentially the same kind of thing as what Geno Smith is. I think that he is a guy that can get you at 500. I just don't think that he is moving the needle for you. So if that's the plan, then I think that you have to be very seriously considering investing in a quarterback in this draft class. And so, to me, I think that Kirk Cousins is a quality player. I just don't think that he moves the needle enough. And I think that if that is the backup plan or that is the contingency plan after trading away Geno Smith, then I don't think that moves you towards a Lombardi trophy. And that, to me, is the only reason why it made any sense to trade away Geno Smith when he was under contract. I don't have any reason to suspect that Geno Smith would have actually sat out the 2025 season had Seattle just kept him. They didn't have to trade him. So to me, I think that the Seahawks view Sam Darnold or whoever else they're going to use to replace Geno Smith as an upgrade. Otherwise, again, I don't think that a guy like John Schneider, who has never been afraid to make the bold moves, I think that he is just doing that now. And again, you can criticize him if you want for some of the moves that he's made that did not result in success, but also recognize some of the moves that he made that did result in success. Selecting Russell Wilson in the first place, making the move for a Marshawn Lynch, or all the different moves that he has made that wound up being very successful. The Percy Harvin move that a lot of people criticize, but helped Seattle win the only Super Bowl in this franchise's history. Again, he has been shown a willingness to make gutsy moves. I think allowing Sam Darnold the opportunity to kind of be the resurrection that Geno Smith was a couple of years ago for the Seahawks, I think that continuing that faith with Sam Darnold would be another step in that type of direction for John Schneider and the Seahawks.
When we come back, the legal tampering period is coming up tomorrow, which means free agency will be underway. Teams can sign players on Wednesday. We're going to have a free agency preview, what we're hearing and what realistic expectations are for the Seahawks with their $60+ million now in salary cap space. We'll get to that coming up next here on our Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every single moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or expecting a game-winning jump shot from Jimmy Butler. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, that's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s tuning in for this special Sunday pre-free agency episode. We greatly appreciate it. As I just mentioned, we've got the legal tampering period. And I always like to say legal tampering period going on because, Rob, anybody that follows the NFL knows that in Indianapolis during the Combine, the illegal tampering period is playing out in hotels, in restaurants. Teams, there's a reason that guys, they have contracts set up on tampering period days. Like, think about how much work has to go into putting those contracts together. The number of them that just get announced immediately on tampering period day. Like, how do you think that happened? Like, there were discussions that happened earlier. But anyway, we expect the Seahawks are going to be in a position where maybe they are a little bit more aggressive. I don't know if we're going to see that big splashy offensive line signing that everybody has been just begging John Schneider to do. But I will say this, though, Rob. If there was a year where John Schneider could finally buck that trend, wouldn't this be the year? I mean, you just traded your starting quarterback. You released Tyler Lockett. You might be trading DK Metcalf. Like, you're going to have to rebuild the image of your offense. Why not rebuild it around an offensive line that you actually pour some financial resources into? And there are some solid offensive linemen in this class. I still think the one big name that I think John Schneider is going to be making a run at is Drew Dalman. I think that Clint Kubiak behind the scenes is going to say, I want a center, an elite center that I can put in the middle of this line. He is the best zone blocking offensive lineman in the NFL, in my opinion. And oh, by the way, he's 26 years old. There's going to be a market. A lot of teams are going to be throwing money. You're going to probably have to overpay. But listen, you got to rebuild the identity of this offense now. You want to get back to running the football? Go get a centerpiece for this offensive line that you haven't had for a decade since you traded Max Unger. I don't think it's far-fetched to think that John Schneider is going to throw his hat into that ring.
No, I 100% agree with you as far as Drew Dalman and his fit in Clint Kubiak's offense. I think that the success that he has had with the Atlanta Falcons in a very similarly, schemed up squad makes a lot of sense. He's a young player. He is a guy that is a cerebral player. Of course, played at Stanford. His father was, a former NFL offensive lineman and coach himself. So again, I mean, he is as pro ready and proven as it gets. So I think that there's an argument to be made for that. Clint Kubiak himself said that he believes that center is a critical position to success. Of course, the New Orleans Saints had used a first-round selection on Eric McCoy a couple of years back. And so clearly Clint Kubiak, Rick Dennison, John Benton, they all are coming from a place that was continually investing early draft picks in offensive linemen, including at the center position. So I think that you can make an argument. If the Seahawks are going to invest big dollars in free agency with offensive linemen, I do think that Drew Dalman is the most likely candidate. I'm going to throw out a couple of other candidates at the guard position that I think could also be in play as more middle range kind of a guys. My personal top pick as far as the fits for Seattle's system would be James Daniels, 27-year-old guard. He's played 7 years already in the NFL just because he came in from Iowa program. Of course, you and I, Corbin, have talked about so many times before. We love the way that Kirk Ferentz continually churns out pro-ready players. To me, James Daniels, he's coming off of injury himself. Torn Achilles, actually, ironically enough, playing with Russell Wilson and the Pittsburgh Steelers this past season. Tevin Jenkins, be another offensive lineman, has some tackle guard versatility. He's played on both sides of the line of scrimmage, both sides, left and right side. Ben Bredesen from Tampa Bay. Anthony Banks, you want to steal from, your NFC West opponent in the San Francisco 49ers. Anthony Banks would make some sense. All of these players are guys who are 28 years or younger. Again, that would make some sense. I really think, though, that the free agent move that's going to happen here is, as we talked about in the last couple of segments, I think that Seattle is going to be a big player in the Sam Darnold sweepstakes. I also think that they have to figure out what they're doing at the inside linebacker position with Ernest Jones. And then, of course, big news here on Sunday, the day before the legal tampering, with the Seahawks retaining Jarran Reed. We've talked about this before. Seattle needed to have some sheriffs, along the line of scrimmage, offensive and defensive linemen, and Jarran Reed is that type of a guy. So to me, Seattle is basically checking off every box except the one that a lot of Seahawks fans out there want. They want that offensive lineman, but as I mentioned a couple of moments ago, I really think that this could be an offensive line group that Seattle actually kind of punts on, just because of the fact that they have invested as much as they have in the draft. 7 selections over the last 3 years. 3 tackles, 3 guards, a center, and I would argue that maybe the best fit on their roster right now at the center position is actually the undrafted free agent Jalen Sandell. So again, who was brought in 2024. So that's 8 offensive linemen currently on Seattle's roster. I just don't know if there is an awful lot of space, frankly, for the Seahawks to be investing that much in the offensive line in free agency or even in this draft class, Corbin. So I think there's a possibility that Seahawks fans are hoping for that big splashy free agent signing along the offensive line, as you just pointed out. They might be disappointed because I don't know that Seattle is going to do that. I think it's going to be fascinating to see the direction that John Schneider and the Seahawks take over the next couple of days.
As I mentioned, if there's a year that they're going to buck that trend, this has got to be the year, though. And listen, fans are going to say, why would you keep all the guys that were, on that offensive line that was not good last year? Why would you just roll it back with that group? I am in agreement you can't roll it back with the same cast of characters. Now, could you have guys like Christian Haynes end up being quality starters still down the line? Absolutely. Maybe they punt on the guard class because they're thinking Christian Haynes and Satoa Lamea can still be both starters for this football team. Maybe still Anthony Bradford is in that mix, even though I don't think it's a great scheme fit with Clint Kubiak. There's young guards galore there. I just still think the center position, though, this is a scheme where that is a premium position. And so I'm wondering just how much this new coaching staff is going to have to say or sway at least on what John Schneider is going to end up doing. But you now have the money. You can't make the excuse. And look, it can't be 2020 either. They had $50 million in cap space, and we saw what they turned it into free agency-wise in 2020. It ended up being unmitigated disaster. Most of the signings that they made were afterthoughts. Go invest this money in premium game changers. And if that means retaining Ernest Jones, getting Sam Darnold, and then going out and signing Drew Dalman, if that's your big three and then you don't do a lot of other things, that's a really successful offseason to me, considering where they are at right now and the fact that there might be 10 more million in cap space if they trade DK Metcalf. We don't know where that is going. So this is just, it's a very different free agency period, Rob, than what we've seen in the past, where you're wondering what the Seahawks are going to do, not just because they're looking for a quarterback, which they haven't done in the free agency period ever. Right? Since they signed Matt Flynn way back in the day, they have not been in the free agent market for quarterbacks. You might have just Jackson Smith and Jigba, and you're missing two of your most iconic receivers. This is not a great receiver class for free agency or the draft, but that might be a position that they're going to have to really prioritize there. There are a lot of moving parts here, and this is the last thing that I'm going to say, just kind of to finish this up. And I don't want fans to think that I'm saying it doesn't get done, because I still think Ernest Jones signed with the Seattle Seahawks. But we just saw Nick Bolton sign with the Kansas City Chiefs before free agency opened on a 3-year, $45 million deal. If you look at those two guys' stat lines, they're almost identical in every single category, and they're 3 months apart age-wise. I mean, these guys are basically clones of each other, maybe a little different playing style, but they still produce the same. Ernest Jones is clearly the cream of the crop now on the linebacker crop because Zach Bond got a new contract. We just saw Bolton get a new contract. Terrell Bernard got extended for $50 million in Buffalo. Like, all the comparables are getting 13, 14, 15, 16, $17 million per year. Ernest Jones is going to be the class in this free agent group if he is allowed to hit free agency and talk to other teams. And that makes it, this is no longer, we should have learned this from this last week. There is no such thing as a slam dunk anymore with the Seahawks right now.
Well, I will say this. While I agree with you that Ernest Jones is the cream of the crop at the linebacker position in free agency, I do think that there are several quality candidates as far as rookies that might be available as a replacement. And also, I really believe that Mike Macdonald's specialty is at the inside linebacker position. The same way that I argued that before with Pete Carroll was the head coach, that his specialty was in the secondary. And so I thought that Seattle was a little bit more willing to allow some guys maybe to leave via free agents, like a Byron Maxwell, for example, and just be able to replace them, because that is what Pete Carroll specialized at and was able to find guys. I think that the Seahawks feel very confident that Mike Macdonald and John Schneider and his scouts, of course, are going to be able to find somebody who could at least be a quality player inside linebacker, typically one of the easiest positions to find via the draft. That said, I do think Seattle is a better team with Ernest Jones, but as Seattle just proved with sending Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders, they are not willing to extend their salary cap for any one player, regardless of how important they are viewed by others outside of the franchise. And so I don't think that the Seahawks feel like they are been painted into a corner in any way. I think that they basically feel very confident that they can replace Ernest Jones. I don't think that they want to. Obviously, they made the trade for him in the first place. You'd hate just to give up the assets that they did for a rental on a good player. But a player who is coming off an injury, a player I talked about before, is kind of slim-shouldered. You worry about, is he going to be able to physically hold up? I agree with you, Corbin. I think that the Seahawks ultimately sign Ernest Jones, but at the same time, I'm not just going to give him some contract worth an annual average of $17 million, as some are speculating online. I think that he's a good player. I haven't yet seen him really, become an All-Pro, and so I don't know that you want to pay him All-Pro caliber money.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We will have a Monday show coming up tomorrow as well. I'll be taking a dive into all the latest rumors circulating on the legal tampering period, and we might even have some new contract news. So make sure that you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Go Hawks.